Hey there guys, what's going on? It's Gale here, back again with another Persona video, and today I wanted to make this video to talk a little bit about Persona 6, where it's at, where do I think it's at, and also along with that talk about why I think Persona 4 Revival makes sense. Why does it make sense to exist now, and why not something else? Why not Persona 6, for example? Why not a Persona 1 and 2 remake? Of course, something I've been, if you guys know me very well from my streams and from my yesteryears of streaming on Twitch and stuff, why do I think it deserves to exist more than 1 and 2 at the moment? And it's something I've been clamoring for a long time, 1 and 2's remake, but of course this is what we have instead, and I think it makes a lot more sense for this to exist, and I'll explain why in this video. Of course, this is a very subjective video. This is going to be my opinion entirely, and what I want you guys to do in the comment section below is not necessarily agree with me if you don't feel like agreeing with me. If you disagree with me, let me know in the comment section down below. If you agree with me as well, that's also fine. Leave a comment down below. I'm curious to see what you guys have to say as well, because to be honest, I've been on Reddit, I've been on Twitter, and it's been pretty mixed, right? The whole notion of Persona 4 Revival, the existence of it has been pretty mixed, and I don't think it's unfair necessarily as to why people are mad that, it's not Persona 1 and 2 remake, which I'll explain later on why I think they've not done it yet, and why Persona 6 doesn't exist. Because also remember, we are at a point now where the gap and the duration between a Persona game's release is the longest it's ever been. Persona 4 to Persona 5 was about 7 to 8 years. I think Persona 4 came out 2008. Persona 5 was 2016 or something like that. I think it was 2016. Let me just check. Yeah, PS3, PS4 was 2016. It was 2016 in Japan, 2017 worldwide. So 7 to 8 years, basically. We'll call it 7 to 8 years. Right now, we're at 8 years. It's 2016 was the launch of Persona 5. Persona 6, nowhere to be seen, and it's 2025, right? And we know it's not coming out this year, otherwise we would have gotten that instead of Persona 4 Revival for sure. Because even Persona 4 Revival, I don't think we're going to be getting that until early 2026, if not mid 2026, in my opinion. The fact that we don't have a release date makes me think it's definitely 2026. So we are at a point where it's the longest it's ever been, the gap between a Persona title. And so it's completely understandable as to why a lot of people are waiting and wondering where it's at. And to be quite honest, this message from Wada, and that's the reason why we're on this page, says to me and tells me that at least the leaks and everything have been right so far. A lot of people have been leaking Persona 6 for, I think, the best part of 2 or 3 years now, and every leak has said that the development is active, they're working on it, there are things in the works, potentially, there have been leaks about potentially a female MC, and not only that, actually, not even the leaks, but Atlus themselves have been kind of hinting towards a potential Persona 6 title via the wallpapers and stuff that we got during the, I think it was 25th anniversary of Atlus, I remember, or Persona, 25th anniversary of Persona, where we had the wallpaper with all the characters and their colors, of course, right? P5 was red, P4 was yellow, P3 is blue, and then in the corner you could see that there's a green bucket, kind of, and we've been assuming that the next color was going to be green. So even Atlus themselves have been hinting with the green color scheme for quite a while now, it feels like, right? With a lot of their marketing and stuff like that, they've been hinting towards a potential green color as the theme for, or as the significant or signature color, there we go, signature color for Persona 6. So it's in development, and like I said, this message, at the end of this message, the last paragraph, after he talks about how Persona 4 is close and near to their hearts, they talk about that they are actively preparing for the future development of the Persona series. As a studio, we're working hard to meet the expectations of fans around the world, and our work is progressing well. Now, that to me is very significant. We're working hard to meet the expectations of fans, because this is not like any of the previous Persona titles. Let's not get it twisted, right? P1 to P2, P2 to P3, P2 to P3 was probably one of their biggest developments, you could argue, right? Of course, right? The significant changes they made, the introduction of social links and stuff like that. And then, of course, P5 was, of course, where they truly went mainstream, right? You could argue and say P5 was their most important game, and the game that really pushed them to the forefront and got people to start playing the other Persona titles. As much as I know we like to joke that, Persona 5 fans have never played a Persona game, Persona 5 is what really pushed them into the mainstream. And so to follow up on Persona 5 is a challenge. It's a very difficult challenge, and I completely get from a not just a gameplay standpoint, by the way, not just a gameplay or graphical standpoint, but more so from a story standpoint. Because at the end of the day, if there's one thing that's rarely missed, it's a Persona story, right? So going into Persona 6, it's obviously going to be very challenging for them, I'd imagine, to work and make a cast and story that would fit a theme really well. And especially in this day and age, with all the stuff that's going around the world, I'd imagine that they're trying to nail down on a theme that would make a lot of sense. I'm pretty sure by now they would have probably nailed down a theme, but it's probably ever evolving, the storylines, the characters, what each character does. Maybe some characters have to swap roles and stuff like that. It's probably been a bit of a trek to ensure that whatever they're going to bring out next is going to at least meet, if not exceed, the expectations of fans, right? At the end of the day, that's what they have to do, especially following Persona 5. If we talk about Persona titles as a whole, I know some people will say Persona 3 is their favorite. Some people will even say 1 and 2 is their favorite. I say Persona 4 is my favorite. But for the most part, a lot of people will say Persona 5 is their favorite. And so it's a very difficult challenge for them to probably try and work on a game to match, if not exceed, the quality that was Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal by extension, right? So it's going to be very interesting to see how they fare. But the other thing that I would like to mention, because I don't think people know, I think people know about this, is what I want to say. I want to say people know about this, but just to confirm, if you didn't know about this, every studio in Atlus, or I should say every department in Atlus, works on a different game. It's not like the same people who work on Mega 10 work on Persona as well. So don't worry about that. I know a lot of people will say like, oh, they were working on Metaphor, so surely that means, it's difficult for them to work on Persona 6. Well, that's not really the case, because what Atlus has is 3 different creative departments. One is Team Maniacs. They work entirely on the Mega 10 series, along with some of the other stuff as well, like Atrian Odyssey and stuff like that. You have P Studio, that is entirely Persona related. Everything to do with Persona they work on. And then on top of that, you have Studio Zero, which of course has worked on Metaphor ReFantazio, and of course the re-release of Catherine Full Body. So I wouldn't worry too much on that front. I wouldn't worry about like developers, they're struggling with developers, too many different games being worked on, stuff like that. I wouldn't worry about that. They have different teams for different projects. At most, you might see some developers going back and forth between projects, but for the most part, the directors, producers, and stuff like that, they're all working on different things basically. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But of course, you have to acknowledge that they're working on other things alongside Persona 6, the likes of Persona 3 Reload, Persona 5 The Phantom X, Persona 4 Revival, and then up until this point they were working on Strikers, they worked on Tactica, they worked on, was that it pretty much? I think that's pretty much it. And I guess you could argue and say the ports of the games as well to PC and Xbox, because that happened in the last couple of years in itself as well. But obviously I do think it's a case in which of like, I know it's been a long wait, but I do think it makes sense for them to, still work on, refining and fine-tuning the story side of things, the gameplay side of things, because at the end of the day, they want to, when it's a new game, you don't want to keep the same sort of mechanics and stuff like that. Persona 3 to Persona 4 had changes. You had the introduction of like stuff like shuffle time and, some other additional things as well during the combat. Then you had P4 to P5, which completely revamped the entirety of the systems. You brought back negotiations. You had, of course, things like technicals and stuff like that. And then even P5 to P3 Reload as well. You had some things going away. Technicals went away again and stuff like that. So I do think that they're going to try and work on refining and making fresh things when it comes to the gameplay front. But I do think a lot of their time and work is probably going into, of course, the story side of things, how are you going to make sure that the story works extremely well? So I'm quite curious to see how they're gonna go, of course, right? Because like I said, P5 was such a I'm playing through it right now, but P5 has been so impactful, to the fan base and to the popularity of the Persona series, that it is a challenge to match the expectations set by that game. And so I think it's a case of like they're just taking their time. And I know it's an easy cop out to say that, but I think it just they need time. They need time. I wouldn't be surprised if we do get it by 2027 is my guess. I think 2027 would be my guess. I think we'll get P4 revival early 2026, probably like Feb, maybe March, something like that, I think. And then we'll probably see Persona 6 be announced at like the next Summer Games Fest or something. I genuinely believe that will be the case. Now, I want to talk a little bit about why I think P4 revival makes a lot more sense than, say, P1 and P2's remake. And it all comes down and boils down to the fact that Persona 4 is already a fairly complete game. You don't need to make that many changes if you think about it. And, I know a lot of people are already talking about this, and a lot of people have actually mentioned this on, various social media platforms, Reddit, Twitter, YouTube as well. P4 Golden is already a very good game, you could argue and say. You don't really need a remake for Persona 4 just yet. But to hold us over and to ensure that there is also more money coming into the studio, you could argue and say, for them as well, and to ensure that the Persona name is still ongoing, even though you technically already have Persona 5 The Phantom X existing as a live service game, to ensure that. But I guess from a normal game standpoint, having Persona 4 there will help a lot, right? And like I said, because it's a complete game, it makes sense. I know a lot of people are clamoring for a Persona 1 and 2 remake. I've been for the longest time. If you've known me for a while, if you've watched any of my streams from when I was on Twitch, or even when I've been doing stuff on YouTube for the last couple of years, I have been somebody who's been saying we need a Persona 1 and 2 remake for a very long time. It's been a very, very long time. But I don't think it makes sense for them to do Persona 1 and 2's remake right now if they're working on the development of Persona 6. Because Persona 1 and 2, both games, are way too unique. They're not necessarily the same or in any way, shape, or form similar to any of the modern era Persona titles, the Hoshino era Persona titles, you could say. Persona 3, 4, and 5, there were no social links. The gameplay in 1 is completely different. It's more of like it's kind of like a pseudo-tactical RPG, basically, you could argue and say, with the way it works. You have to do your party formations and stuff as well, like the way you would form your party, the positions they'd be in a fight. When they'd get ambushed, the party would switch around, like you wouldn't be able to switch sides. The formation would basically be like you're being attacked from the back, so you'd have to manage it accordingly, and so on and so forth. It's a very, very different set of games. Persona 2 is still yet at least a bit closer to the likes of P3, P4, and P5 in terms of some of the gameplay mechanics, but one's a completely different game. And to me personally, if you're going to be remaking those two games, it is going to take a lot more effort and a lot more time, because I do believe that, especially with 1, you're going to want to introduce more things. You're going to have to introduce social links, arcanas, and so on and so forth. P2 as well, social links will have to come into play big time. And I genuinely think that those are projects you'd want to do after you're done with a bigger project, in the form of P6, because I would say in terms of the project size and how difficult it is, I would say P6 is of course the hardest project they've got, like the biggest project they've got. A lot more time needs to be put into it because you've got to make a brand new story, gameplay wise. You'll have to make new mechanics and so on and so forth. It's a completely brand new game you're making, right? P1 and 2 is probably next, with I would say P1 a little bit more challenging than P2 because of the time it was made in, the completely different gameplay mechanics and everything. You'd have to change everything. If you want to make it like the modern era Persona titles, it's a complete revamp. And so in my opinion, if you're making Persona 6 and also doing 1 and 2, you're gonna be waiting for Persona 6 for a much longer time, in my opinion. Persona 4, on the other hand, the reason why I think it makes sense is because it's a much easier remake to make. Because at the end of the day, what you're doing primarily is you're working on effectively, like, you know, improving the environments. The story is there. All you need to do maybe is make some slight changes to the maybe some of the dialogue, maybe introduce some new things, maybe one or two new social links maybe could be introduced, right? I know a lot of people have been clamoring for the ramen girl to be a social link, the girl at Aya, Aya, that's the one, rather than the fox. I think the fox is still fine as a social link, in my opinion, but yeah, you know, at the end of the day, it's primarily the environments and maybe some of the dungeons and stuff need not some of the dungeons, all of the dungeons need updating and stuff, right? But yeah, I just feel like it's a little bit more easier in that sense to make a title like Persona 4 as a remake. And even then, of course, it's still early in development, you can tell, right? The environments are great. I'll say this, by the way. I know a lot of people have made comments about like how meh it looks. I think the lighting is fine for morning Inaba. Evening Inaba needs to be a little bit more yellow, of course, for sure. But if this is morning Inaba, that's fine for me. The environments look good, the buildings and stuff, maybe some slight polishing for the environments. Main thing I would say that needs to improve is, of course, use model. Some of you could see his feet are clipping a little bit and stuff, and just generally it's a little, maybe not jank, but kind of clunky it looks a little bit. So again, those are improvements that will happen over time. It's early in development, as it said in the bottom right when the trailer started, of course, right? Early development content presented in this video is subject to change. We know this mix of gameplay and non-gameplay footage. We know this. So yeah, in my opinion, I think it just makes a lot more sense for them to do P4 Revival as a way to hold us over until P6 comes out. And at the end of the day, P4 is also still one of their more significant titles, you know. You may as well have got all three of their biggest games, you could say, right? P3, P4, and P5R in the modern day graphics, rather than P3 and P5 in amazing graphics, and then P4 is just languishing in the middle, basically. So yeah, that's just my personal opinion. But let me know what you guys think. I'm curious to see what you guys have to say down below. Do you guys agree with what I have to say in regards to P6 and P4's remake? Like I said, I'm still very excited for P4's remake. I think they'll do a good job, honestly, on it. I'm very much looking forward to it, and I'm very excited to play it, of course. I do think P6 will come out inevitably. I wouldn't worry too much about it. It may take a little bit longer. It's probably going to be a 10 to 11 year gap. To be honest, we're probably going to have to wait for another 2 years is my guess. But I'm okay with waiting, because I do think they need time in polishing it and ensuring it's, you know, done right, especially considering, you know, like I said, how big P5 was. And it's not that much of a gap between P4 to P5 as it has been P5 to P6. Like, if it was like a plus 5 years, like, oh, P4 to P5 was 7 years and P5 to P6 is 12, 13 years, then it's like, okay, yeah, you've taken more than enough time. But also, I feel like as Persona fans, we're eating good, you know, at the end of the day. We've gotten so many good things in the recent years. P5 Strikers. P5 Tactica, I've heard, is a bit of a hit or miss. I need to still play that, of course, after I'm done with P5 R. But I've heard Tactica, hit or miss. But then P3 Reload, P4 Revival, and even technically if you go and play some other titles as well, some of the other Atlas titles, Metaphor I've heard is amazing. You have also, you know, SMT5 Vengeance as well. I think we're eating good as Atlas fans and Persona fans. You've got so many things to play that I think it's okay for us to wait a little bit to ensure that we're getting something really special. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Leave a like if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy, everybody. Bye-bye.